Continuing with Vastarian. Thus began Victor Chirion's preoccupation with a certain book and a certain hallucinated world, though to make a distinction between these two phenomena ultimately seemed an error. The book, indeed, did not merely describe that strange world but, in some obscure fashion, was a true composition of the thing itself, its very form incarnate. Each day thereafter he studied the hypnotic episodes of the little book. Each night, as he dreamed, he carried out shapeless expeditions into its fantastic topography. To all appearances it seemed he had discovered the summit or abyss of the unreal, that utopia of exhaustion, confusion, and debris where reality ends and where one may dwell among its ruins. And it was not long before he found it necessary to revisit that 12-sided shop, intending to question the obese bookseller on the matter of the book and unintentionally learning the truth of how it came to be sold. When he arrived at the bookstore, sometime in the middle of a grayish afternoon, Victor Chirion was surprised to find that the door, which had opened so freely on his previous visit, was now firmly locked. It would not even rattle in its frame when he nervously pushed and pulled on the handle. Since the interior of the store was lighted, he took a coin from his pocket and began tapping on the glass. Finally, someone came forward from the shadows of the back room. Closed, the bookseller pantomimed on the other side of the glass. But Chirion argued, pointing to his wristwatch. Nevertheless, the wide man shouted. Then, after scrutinizing the disappointed patron, the bookseller unlocked the door and opened it far enough to carry on a brief conversation. "And what is it I can do for you? I'm closed, so you'll have to come some other time if I only wanted to ask you something. Do you remember the book that I bought from you some days ago?" "Yes, I remember," replied the bookseller, as if quite prepared for the question. "And let me say that I was quite impressed, as of course was the other man." "Impressed?" Chirion repeated. "Ecstatic is more the word in his case," continued the bookseller. "He said to me, 'The book has found its reader,' and what could I do but agree with him?" "I'm afraid I don't understand," said Chirion. The bookseller blinked and said nothing. After a few moments he reluctantly explained, "I was hoping that by now you would understand." "He hasn't contacted you? The man who was in here that day?" "No, why should he?" The bookseller blinked again and said, "Well, I suppose there's no reason for you to stand out there. It's getting very cold, don't you feel it? Please come in." As Victor Chirion entered, the bookseller stuck his head outside, looking up the stairs that led down to his shop and scanning as much of the street above as he could see. Then he closed the door and pulled Chirion a little to one side of it, whispering, "There's just one thing I would like to tell you. I made no mistake the other day about the price of that book. And it was that price which was paid by the other man, minus the small amount that you contributed. I didn't cheat anyone, least of all him. He would have been happy to pay even more to get that book into your hands. And though I'm not exactly sure of his reasons, I think you should know that." "But why didn't he simply purchase the book for himself?" asked Chirion. The bookseller seemed confused. "It was of no use to him. Perhaps it would have been better if you hadn't given yourself away when he asked you about the book. How much you knew?" "But I don't know anything, apart from what I've read in the book itself. I came here to look into its provenance." "Its provenance? You're the one who should be telling me about that. I didn't even know I had that book on my shelves. I tried to price it out of your hands, but I should have expected that he wouldn't allow that. I'm not asking anything of you, don't misunderstand. I've already violated every precept of discretion in this matter. This is such an exceptional case, though. Very impressive, if in fact you are the reader of that book." Realizing that, at best, he had been led into a dialogue of mystification, and possibly one of lies, Victor Chirion had no regrets when the bookseller held the door open for him to leave. But before long he learned why the bookseller had been so impressed with him, and why the crow-like stranger had been so generous, the bestower of the book who was blind to its mysteries. In due course he learned that the stranger had given only so that he might possess the thing he could gain in no other way, that he was reading the book with borrowed eyes and stealing its secrets from the soul of its rightful reader. At last it became clear what was happening to him, and how his strange nights of dreaming were being affected from inside. This phenomenon was not immediately apparent, though. For several more nights, as the outlines of Vastarian slowly pushed through the obscurity of his sleep, a vast terrain emerged from its own profound slumber and loomed forth from a place without coordinates or dimension. And as the oddly angled monuments became manifest once again, they seemed to expand and soar high above, coaxing his sight toward them. Progressively the scene acquired nuance and articulation. Steadily the creation became dense and intricate within its black womb. The streets were sinuous entrails winding through that dark body, and each edifice was the jutting bone of a skeleton hung with a thin musculature of shadows. But little by little, Victor Kyrion began noticing that something was in the course of change during his dreams. The world of Vastarine seemed more and more to be losing its consistency, its suchness. Then one night, just as his vision reached out to embrace fully the mysterious and jagged form of a given dream, it all appeared to pull away, abandoning him on the edge of a dreamless void. The treasured eidolon was receding, shrinking into the distance. Now all he could see was a single street bordered by two converging rows of buildings. And at the opposite end of that street, rising up taller than the buildings themselves, stood a great figure in silhouette. This colossus made no movement or sound but nonetheless increasingly dominated the horizon where the single remaining street seemed to end. From this position the towering shadow was absorbing all other shapes into its own, which gradually gained in stature as the dreamscape withdrew and diminished. And the outline of this titanic figure appeared to be that of a man, yet it was also that of a dark and devouring bird. Though Victor Kyrion managed to awake before the scavenger had thoroughly consumed what was not its own, there was no assurance that he would always be able to do so and that the dream would not pass into the hands of another. And so he conceived and executed the act that was necessary to keep possession of what he had desired for so long. "Vastarian," he whispered as he stood in the shadows and moonlight of that bare little room, where a monolithic metal door prevented his escape. Within that door a small square of thick glass was implanted so that he might be watched by day and by night. And there was an unbending web of heavy wire covering the window which overlooked the city that was not Vastarian. "Never," chanted a voice which might have been his own. Then more insistently, "I told him that. I told him. Never, never, never." When the door opened and some men in uniforms entered the room, they found Victor Kyrion screaming to the raucous limits of his voice and trying to scale the thick metal mesh veiling the window, as if he were dragging himself along some unlikely route of liberation. Of course, they pulled him to the floor. And they stretched him out upon the bed, where his wrists and ankles were tightly strapped. Then through the doorway strode a nurse who carried a slender syringe crowned with a silvery needle. During the injection he continued to scream words which everyone in the room had heard before, each outburst developing the theme of his unjust confinement, how the man he had murdered was using him in a horrible way, a way impossible to explain or make credible. The man could not read the book there, that book, and was stealing the dreams which the book had spawned. "Stealing my dreams," he mumbled softly as the drug began to take effect. "Stealing my..." The stewards of Victor Kyrion's incarceration remained around his bed for a few moments, silently staring at its restrained occupant. Then one of them pointed to the book and initiated a conversation now familiar to them all. "What should we do with it? It's been taken away enough times already, but then there's always another that appears. And there's no point to it. Look at these pages, nothing written anywhere. So why does he sit reading them for hours? He does nothing else. I think it's time we told someone in authority. Of course, we could do that, but what exactly would we say? That a certain inmate should be forbidden from reading a certain book? That he becomes violent? And then they'll ask why we can't keep the book away from him or him from the book. What should we say to that? There would be nothing we could say. Can you imagine what lunatics we would seem? As soon as we opened our mouths, that would be it for all of us. And when someone asks what the book means to him, or even what its name is, what would be our answer? As if in response to this question, a word was uttered by the criminally insane creature bound to the bed. But none of them could understand the meaning of what he had said. They were part of a world of overbearing and yet deficient realities. They were shackled for life to their own bodies, while he was now in a place that owed nothing to corporeal existence. And never, it truly seemed, could he be forced to abandon this domain of wayward wonders. Never.